Hi, yes, everyone. This lecture is looking at the role of the media in crime. There are a couple of ways of looking at this. The first way is, how does the media actually represent crime? And secondly, can the media actually cause crime? One area that you might want to think about when it comes to the media, and the postmodernists are very interested in this, is cybercrime, the growth of cybercrime. So recently there was a story about the United States government charging Chinese military officers on a cybercrime of stealing data on companies. So you might want to look at that story as an example of cybercrime. The Sun newspaper is one of the most popular ones in the UK, and typically 30% of the news reports in the Sun are about crime. This compares with 5% in The Guardian, which is a broadsheet. So it would suggest that actually the majority of the population who are reading red tops like the Sun and Daily Mail are being told that there is a much higher level of crime, as opposed to those who read the broadsheets would consider there is a much lower level of crime. And that might affect the people's behaviour. In what ways do you think? So, crime has been a fascinating topic for the news for centuries. Okay, left realists argue that actually there's a real fear of crime felt by ordinary people, but they are actually critical of how the media tends to drive this fear and possibly exaggerate the fear. Now, can you remind yourself who are the left realists? People's perception of crime very much comes from newspapers, TV news, films, magazines, books, and programs like Crime Watch, okay, and programs that recreate or show fly-on-the-wall footage. Now, one criticism of this point is that many people who are scared of crime already may stay in and watch more TV that may make them more scared of crime anyway, okay, so they were already scared, so it wasn't that media was actually making them scared of crime. So what effect does the way the media reports crime actually have on people's behaviour in terms of their perception of typical victims or typical criminals? What's interesting is that violent crime is so over-reported in the media when compared with property crime, at a ratio of 4-1, okay? Now this compares with only 9-1 of it appearing in official statistics, so it's grossly over-exaggerated. 64% of British newspaper crime stories featured violence in 1999, whereas the British Crime Survey found that only 6% of crimes reported by victims were violent. And you've got to remember, the British Crime Survey is more valid than official crime statistics. Okay? News stories tend to focus on stories with young ethnic minority suspects, while they will focus on stories with white, middle class, particularly child victims. Okay, this overrepresents these groups disproportionately. Generally, news stories seem to exaggerate the risks faced by higher status white people, okay, when actually the people more likely to be victims of crime are the poor. And they seem to over-exaggerate the number of women and children and older people as victims as well. All of these things help to control people's behaviour and create more fear in society. One of the positives of the media reporting of crime is they can sensitize people to certain issues. So, for example, media has campaigned for zero tolerance in domestic violence, okay, as not being a family matter but a crime. And as a result, domestic violence is now there are laws against it, and it's investigated much more readily by the police. However, the media has also been accused of desensitizing people to violence and crimes such as prostitution, gun crime, and knife crime, because it's always in the news and just seems so normal. So, can the media actually create crime? Well, arguably, yes. Some, particularly feminists, would argue that the media drives a sense of arousal for particular types of crime, either through looking at violent imagery or sexual crime. The media drives materialism, okay, the desire for material goods, which you could link to Merton's strain theory. There's also the theory of copycat crime. So if you Google Thailand bans Grand Theft Auto, is that an example of a copycat crime? Are we really that susceptible to the media that will just go out and act like the media tells us to? Arguably, many films and crime dramas actually teach us how to commit a crime and get away with it, with lots of stuff on forensics and what have you. Many, like The Italian Job and The Hustle, actually glamorize particular types of crime, with people having luxurious lifestyles and acting quite cool and having lots of status in society. And not to mention the fact that many films tend to make the police force look completely incompetent, as if they're unable to investigate crimes successfully. Now, Stan Cohen would certainly argue that the media can create crime, and it can actually increase the perception of the level of crime. We all know about his idea about moral panics, okay? And he argued that moral panics became much more common at times of social change, whether it's like economic recession or in the post-war years when things were changing quite rapidly. Cohen talks about folk devils to refer to such groups, okay? So the mods and rockers would be his research, okay? Apparently it was a very quiet weekend and there's no other news, but the media started reporting on these apparent clashes between mods and rockers. And as a result, there was lots of journalists on site at these seaside resorts who happened to catch a few pictures of some fights and some deck chairs being thrown. And this became a complete moral panic, and the police cracked down on all these groups around the country, which actually ended up creating more deviance as these groups absorbed their labels and acted up to them. A recent example of a moral panic could possibly be football violence, okay? The media's actually been accused of amplifying or promoting the problem of football violence. Film crews and reporters have at times provoked fans. They've been on site where the fans have been drinking abroad, where there's a World Cup match, for example. They have bought them drinks, and they've tried to encourage some sort of behaviour in order to get a good story. And tabloid newspapers in particular have been thought, throughout the past 20 to 30 years, been viewed as xenophobic and creating a fear of foreigners and encouraging violence against foreigners. So what is the evidence of this? Well, you can look at Jock Young did some research in how the media presented information about certain deviant groups in stereotypical ways. And they become seen in terms of their master status, which is one of Becker's terms. You guys have been looking at the hippie case study. This is an example of a headline. What sorts of characteristics do they seem to emphasize about the hippie culture? It's certainly not the peace and love side of it. And this drove this cycle of public opinion to become quite hostile to the hippie culture and led to deviancy amplification. So, deviancy amplification is when minor or very rare problems can become serious and commonplace, okay? People become very interested in these and they want to be kept informed about events. The resulting publicity can actually increase deviant behaviour by glamorising it or making it seem more common or acceptable. And in the case of the hippies, it actually led to the further marginalisation of that group. They couldn't get jobs, so as a result they had to turn to criminal means such as drug dealing in order to survive. This is quite an interesting bit of research done by Brian Whitaker, okay, from The Guardian. A few days before 9/11, he actually did a search of how many articles contained the word Muslim. And he then did the same bit of research a year later, including 9 months after 9/11. So before 9/11, it was on average 3,075 times per day. But he found that the broadsheets, such as The Guardian and The Independent and The Times, tended to mention them much more often than the red tops, such as the Daily Mail, the Sun and the Star. A year later, after 9/11, it increased to 8,800 articles containing the word Muslim, an increase of 286%. But interestingly, the biggest increases were in the red tops. They were now mentioning the word Muslim far more often than they had before 9/11. Now, bearing in mind, the red tops have a much bigger circulation than the broad tops, we can now make the assumption that they are now talking much more about Muslims in their news story. However, what's different is the tone of the articles where they talk about Muslims. The broadsheets are much more likely to talk about Islamic culture, to talk about Islam in the context of world news, whereas the Sun and the Daily Mail and the Star, for example, will talk about Muslims in the UK, possibly driving sort of wedges between the white and the Muslim populations. This is a form of ideological control, and Miller and Riley are very interested in how moral panics can be used to soften up public opinion and as a form of ideological social control in order to introduce more strict measures. For example, Islamophobia. The result has been increased state control. The government has increased anti-terror legislation, which has received broad public support. People can be detained without trial now. We have increased security checks at airports. Our social media is now accessible by the police and security agencies, all in the name of protecting us against a perceived terrorist attack. Now, how realistic is that attack is possibly up to you guys to decide. This is very similar to Stuart Hall's 1970 study of mugging. Postmodernists are very interested in crime. Kidd, Hewitt and Osborne argue that media reporting of crime is increasingly driven for a need for a spectacle. Now it's almost become like the media coverage of crime has become almost like watching a movie. And people really have started to enjoy watching real life crime dramas, okay? So fly in the wall documentaries with the police force, like, dangerous police chases. They argue that actually crime reporting is becoming increasingly a mixture of factual knowledge and entertainment and sensationalism. This is what Neil Postman calls infotainment. The argument would be, what comes first, the news story or the desire to read that type of news story? So are journalists just reporting the news as it happens, or are they picking and choosing stories that they know the readers will be interested in, like the violent ones, the crimes against white women, the possible terrorist attacks, okay, as opposed to the boring white-collar crimes and property crimes that might happen a bit more frequently? So Anthony Giddens argued that television is starting to stage the spectacle of news and then actually creates the reality. Now, an example of this would be the collapse of the Berlin Wall. The news coverage of that started days beforehand, but because the news coverage was everywhere, people started protesting, they marched to the Berlin Wall, they demanded its collapse, and as the media attention intensified, more people showed up, and more public support was garnered for the collapse of the Berlin Wall, which it then did. So arguably the media actually drove that social change from the excessive reporting and talking about the possible collapse, which eventually led to the collapse of the Berlin Wall. Possibly linking this to the crisis in Ukraine, the media constantly reporting on the possible revolution there, and the media talking about Russia possibly annexing the Crimea, and then Russia did annex the Crimea, and there was lots of public support for that. So what came first, Russia wanting to annex it, or the media talking about Russia trying to annex it? Another area to look at is how the media actually treats victims. The media can be very selective on the types of victims that it focuses on. So, for example, old people, violence against old people is often reported as happening by strangers or carers in care homes. But actually, elder abuse is actually much more common with between elderly people and their families that they still live with. Okay, but this is largely ignored by the newspapers. A key idea is something known as the missing white woman syndrome. Okay, now this is a key sociological idea. The media will excessively cover stories of women or girls that are white, okay, normally at the expense of other newsworthy issues. And I've got a couple of examples in the following couple of slides. So Madeleine McCann, in 2007, her campaign was driven by the media. At exactly the same period of time, Marie-Louise Koza who was 5, was abducted in a Spanish town very nearby by a paedophile ring, but nobody recognises the images of that little girl on the left-hand side, but everybody in the entire world knows who Maddie McCain was. Big difference, ethnicity. The media has been blamed for over-exaggerating the extent of black criminality. So what studies can you use to discuss black criminality? Okay. Generally, what the media tends to ignore, however, is that African Caribbeans and South Asians are twice as likely to be the victims of crime as are the majority of the white population. Okay. What's worse is these are the populations that are much less likely to report crimes to the police because they do not trust the police, which links to Leon Young's left realism. Okay, so probably the level of crime against these groups is actually much, much higher. So what image does this drive then? If we are only seeing the statistics of ethnic minorities as criminals and not as victims, what does that kind of ideas does that reinforce for society? Okay. The media has always been known to target undesirable groups such as gypsies and asylum seekers. These people are viewed as not us or other groups. Now, in terms of functionalists, they would say this actually just helps to remind people of desirable behaviour, part of the collective consciousness. Okay. However, the media can help us to dehumanise some criminals that justifies terrible treatment. So, for example, the treatment of illegal immigrants who end up in detention centres in absolutely disgusting conditions around Dover or around some of the airports, particularly children, and some of the abuse they suffer there. The media tends to demonise rapists, for example, as evil psychopaths, whereas in reality, the majority of victims of rape are raped by men they actually know and often live with. Now, can you think how this is an example of Heinsohn's control theory? So, can you quickly try and answer these 3 questions about the effects of media coverage? Okay, and what research method is it when you count the number of times a concept appears in news stories or on TV? So how do the different theories see the role of the media in relation to crime? Functionalists believe that the media is simply a window into the world and reflecting life as it is. Therefore, for them, the media simply reflects a real picture of crime. Now, when it comes to moral panics, they would say that moral panics are a just reaction to a perceived threat to the established norms and values of society. Okay, so reacting against this perceived threat actually reinforces the collective consciousness. So they're very positive about the role of moral panics. However, critics would argue that the functionalists are very naive, given the fact that the real rate of crime is far higher than the level reported in official statistics. How do we know that the real level of crime is much higher than those that are reported in official statistics? Okay. When it comes to Marxism on media and crime, what would Marx say about moral panics, particularly about the labelled deviance in moral panics? What would he say about that? He would argue that moral panics centre around groups that are viewed as deviant or threatening to the rich and powerful in society. Now, remember Gramsci's argument about the scapegoats in the crisis of hegemony. They highlight the way that the media portrays criminals and criminals as working class and generally ignores white-collar or corporate crime. Now, you can AO2 this point here because I would argue that recently there's been plenty of cases of white-collar crime reported in the news, particularly the MP Margaret Hodge and her grilling of Google and Amazon and Starbucks. Louis Althusser would argue that the media is a branch of the ideological control of society. So remember the 3 pillars or the 3 structures of society. Media is one of the main tools of ideological control of the ruling class. Feminists are very critical, again, of the media and argue that it actually encourages the social control of women. It over-exaggerates women as victims, which controls them and keeps them in their homes. It encourages them to dress modestly and to behave in a particular way. They also say that the media plays down the extent of women as victims of crime. Now, looking at what we've looked at before, would you actually agree with that? Feminists argue that the explicit representation of women in all forms of pornography, including tabloid newspapers and lads mags, actually renders all women potentially unsafe, since they are encouraging predatory attitudes amongst men. Now, if you can remember the list of quotes we looked at when we were trying to work out whether they were from lads mags or whether they were from rapist comments. Now, again, what did Heinsohn say about the role of the media in controlling women? Interactionists are very interested in the social construction of news. They argue there is a social process that goes on behind the scenes where news editors and news reporters will select the stories they believe are newsworthy. So there is no way that the news is an objective reality, because they go through a social process of choosing the stories that they believe the news will be popular and will make newspapers sell. Okay, they focus on the way the media labels certain groups as problems. So, for example, benefit cheats, people who are sick or skiving, and amplifies this deviance. What sociologists can you discuss when writing about the interactionist theory on media and crime? And finally, as discussed before, the postmodernist theory on media and crime is that it's a crucial player in our perception of the level of crime, whether that is accurate or not. Arguably, the media is driving the risk consciousness in our society and actually leading to us to alter our behaviour because we are so aware of the risks in society. So, for example, many Americans will no longer fly because of the perceived risk. This is similar to, or linked very closely to, Beck's risk consciousness theory that we will look at in the context of globalization and also in the modernism versus postmodernism debate. Here is some of the questions that you come across in your crime and deviance paper, although you will not have a 6-mark question, so please ignore that 6-mark question actually.